What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Dark Ages. So, here's the thing. Following basically the last issue that we did and the death of Nick Fury, at this point, all the heroes essentially land on the shores of Portugal, right? They are finally in Europe. And as soon as they're there, they're met by the arrival of Deadpool. Now, of course, Deadpool survived all this, which you would kind of expect from Deadpool. One, because of the fact that he's just got an insane healing factor, and two, Deadpool has the power of the plot. He can survive virtually anything. So, one of the things that he does in true Deadpool fashion is, of course, he greets everybody, says, hey, welcome to Europe, and then asks the question, before I bring out my standard hats and accents, I just want to gauge how everybody feels about cultural stereotypes. Now, here's the thing. The only place I've traveled to abroad is London, right? So, outside of like mocking people with London accents, which I didn't do. I don't really know how you do like cultural stereotypes with London. I can say unequivocally they've got tea on lockdown, but I imagine going to France and just being like, ha ha, oui, fancy people. Like that's probably gonna piss off people in France. I can't imagine why I wouldn't, but nonetheless, right? It's just one of those little Deadpool things where he just kind of hangs out and does his own little thing. But then ultimately he's basically told that like Nick Fury's died. And this is one of those sentimental moments from Deadpool that you don't normally see, where he's just kind of like, damn, all right, like he was one of the good guys, where Deadpool's kind of like, okay, and then like literally stands in line with everybody else and basically pays his respects to Nick Fury. Now, one of the things to understand about this, and this is one of the cool things to understand about Deadpool, 9 times out of 10, Deadpool's written as a goofy character. There have been precious few stories after the Joe Kelly and Ed McGuinness era, really, where Deadpool was written in a serious way, but that has happened before. And one of the things that was really a big focus in that era and really kind of carried on into future stories is the level of respect Deadpool has for people sometimes. And Nick Fury's one of those guys where even though Deadpool is zany and goofy and kind of silly, he still respects Nick Fury quite a lot, just because of all the things that Nick Fury's done over the course of his life, the work that he's put in, and the fact that even though some of the things he did were a bit questionable, he was always one of the good guys. He was usually looking out for the superhero community, and so Deadpool can respect that. From there, we switch over to Paris, right? Now remember, Apocalypse kind of has this big plot that he's really engaging in terms of how it is that he intends to conquer everything. And so having this conversation with Tony Stark, the question that's asked here is, can Apocalypse's plan come to fruition? And where Tony's like, I understand what it is that you want, but I need to see the size of the problem that we're talking about here. And so this is when Apocalypse tells Kilgrave to come with himself and Tony Stark as they go down into the core of the Earth. Now, Kilgrave doesn't necessarily want to do that. And here's the thing that I do want to address here. So for the people who are unfamiliar with Zebediah Kilgrave, he's just a guy who controls like the minds of other people, right? Makes them do things that they don't want to necessarily do. Kilgrave's power is more nuanced than that. It's not really mind control so much as pheromones, but one of the things that's been established over the years in Marvel Comics is that if a person's fortitude, like if they are resilient enough or they have enough just gumption, they can actually overcome Kilgrave. And Apocalypse certainly fits that mold. Apocalypse is not a guy that Kilgrave would be able to overcome. It just wouldn't work that way. I would go as far as to say there was probably a time when he tried, right? When he tried to overtake Apocalypse and it simply just didn't work. I would love to see that moment just in Marvel Comics when Kilgrave tries to ensnare Apocalypse and, well, Apocalypse would probably kill him, just for inconveniencing him. If anything else. But nonetheless, having Kilgrave at his side here, as you guys know, allows Kilgrave to control virtually everyone here. So in that instance, Kilgrave's a huge asset. The bigger question that you have to ask here is, how does it work with somebody like Tony Stark? Well, the caveat that Tom Taylor seems to be going with here is that in effect, Kilgrave snuck up on Tony Stark. So even if you have resilience, Kilgrave can sneak up on you and overtake you, which then begs the question, how does it work with Apocalypse? Well, there's all kinds of questions with this story, right? Like, how can Peter Parker keep us abreast on circumstances that he wasn't a part of, right? How can he narrate circumstances that he was not involved in? He wasn't there. But there's all kinds of things about this story that are a little wonky, but you know how it is with comics. We just take it with a grain of salt, just go with it. But the thing about this is that Tony Stark, of course, ends up going to the core of the Earth along with Apocalypse and Kilgrave and basically everybody else, Reed Richards and all them. And of course, we're ultimately met with the arrival of the Unmaker. Of course, again, this being that is a living machine that in turn has been depowered with the opening of this portal by Stephen Strange that emits this constant EMP. But with Stephen Strange being dead, there's no way to to close the portal. So as long as this portal stays open, both the Earth and the Unmaker will basically have no method of functionality whatsoever on a technological sense. But if they close this portal, then the Unmaker will wake back up again, right? It'll just reactivate. The Earth will get electricity back, but it won't make any difference because everything you would need electricity for will be destroyed when the Earth was annihilated in the first place. And so one of the cool things, and this is one of the little details that I like about how Tom Taylor wrote this, obviously the story itself is written in a bit of a rush, but one of the things that I love about how Tom Taylor handled this is as they're passing the body of Doctor Strange, they're told, do not touch the body of Strange, right? He may be dead, but his magical wards are still in place, and God only knows what it's gonna do to you. But that's when they ultimately get to the portal. And the theory that Reed Richards has is that on the other side of this portal is basically a neutron star that gives off a constant electromagnetic pulse. And the response of Tony Stark is, well, I mean, that's a good working theory. I mean, we won't really know unless we decide to go through the portal. But if we do, we'd literally have to contend with the gravitational pull of a neutron star. To give you guys perspective here, and I'm not gonna swear by this number, I wanna say I heard it in a documentary somewhere, I don't know if it's really true, but the gravitational pull of a neutron star is so extreme that if you were to somehow be able to put a ladder on the surface of a neutron star and climb up to the top of the ladder, assuming it was like 20 feet, that like the gravitational pull at your feet would be astronomical compared to the gravitational pull at your head. That is about as close as you get to the gravitational pull of a black hole. Again, not gonna swear by that, and I assume somebody out there in the comments section who's more in tune with that aspect of physics can probably give us a better answer than I could. But the thing about this is it's still a cool little thing, right? It's basically the source of where all this comes from. Now, that would also have to assume that this may very well be a dimension that houses nothing but that neutron star, because I don't really know if life could exist in the presence of a neutron star, because it would literally pull in everything around it. You would assume life wouldn't necessarily even have the ability to exist. Either that, or life would exist as a ring around this neutron star. But whatever the case happens to be, that's the source of the problem. And so ultimately, what Apocalypse reveals here is that he has studied the Unmaker for years, right? He says, I've touched every part of its sleeping mind to inhabit it, to take control of a power beyond that of even a celestial or a god. He says, I would not need long minutes, perhaps an hour. And so that's where they're kind of like, damn, to contain the power of a neutron star for an hour, that would be kind of nuts. But that's the goal of Apocalypse. The goal of Apocalypse is to basically reactivate the Unmaker and then seize control of it for himself and then travel around. Now, this is not arbitrary. I mean, it is kind of to a degree, but not necessarily. What Tom Taylor is doing is actually pulling on some strings that are really tied to aspects of Apocalypse's history that are really more in line with antiquity than anything else, right? Just old school stuff. So for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Apocalypse, the way this worked is that for the longest time, he was just an external. And even now, whether or not he's an external is up for debate. A lot of people argue whether or not it's actually true. But regardless, he is, by all standards of measurement, immortal, and he can alter his size to a degree. But when he came across celestial technology for the first time, he didn't know how to utilize it. He couldn't access it because the truth is that he was primitive in comparison to celestial technology. What ended up happening is Cable came from the future, fought Apocalypse, and then some of Cable's techno-organic virus basically infected Apocalypse, and when that happened, it allowed him to access the celestial technology. What ended up happening, and I want to say it was Erisham the Judge who appeared to Apocalypse, but essentially a bargain was struck. And this wasn't something that we learn until after the events of House of M with the Blood of Apocalypse storyline, but we ended up finding out that basically the nature of this deal is that the Celestials would allow Apocalypse to use their power for quote-unquote future payments at a later date. Basically, it was a way for Marvel to just kind of craft a story where they could remove Apocalypse from the equation for the Marvel landscape for however long they needed until they wanted to bring him back. But regardless of the situation, the whole idea here is Apocalypse and celestial technology run hand in hand in that way. The way it was explained in that story, in the Blood of Apocalypse story, is the reason why he's always tried to attain so much power is to ensure that when the time comes that the Celestials basically intend to take him away, that he could actually challenge and defeat them. And so he wouldn't have to worry about being snatched up and tortured, killed, whatever it is that they were going to do to him, experiment on him, or what have you. And so the result of this is that Tom Taylor is largely pulling on those strings. Again, they're archaic strings, they're old strings, but they're strings that are still there nonetheless. And so what this really shows is that by and large, the history of Apocalypse is still intact in this alternate reality story in terms of his schemes, his motivations, his machinations, and why he's doing what he's doing. I mean, we could also surmise that like using the power of the Unmaker, he would bring his social Darwinism to the universe, right, and just rule the entirety entirety of the universe. But at the end of the day, the stance of Iron Man is it's not really possible, but I'm always up for a challenge. And so at that point, what we do is we basically switch back over to probably one of the best moments in the story, which is kind of hilarious, where Dr. Doom gives Peter Parker just this backhanded compliment, right? Where Peter's pissed off at his daughter May for basically sneaking aboard, stowing away. And he's like, they can't come with us. And then Deadpool's kind of like, I mean, really, dude? Because, you know, great responsibility is kind of like your whole thing. And it'd be pretty irresponsible to leave your kid in a refugee camp. So I absolutely love that line of logic from Deadpool, because he's not wrong. There's nothing about what he's saying that's incorrect here, so I absolutely love it. At the same time, Storm's not going back, so there's no real way for the kids to go anywhere, right? Storm's not going back because she's just like, you're gonna need everybody on hand, right? I mean, if you're facing off against Apocalypse, man, it's gonna take a little more than like spider sense to overcome this guy, right? Like, you're gonna need everybody on deck for this. And so it's kind of funny because Peter Parker chastises May, tells her that he's disappointed, and then Dr. Doom's like, if May had not sounded the alarm, the Ghost Raiders' attack may have been fatal to all of us. And he says, I myself am unused to being disobeyed, and it's clear she needs a firmer hand from a stronger patriarch, but she saved us. We would all be dead if it had not been for your daughter's insolence. Now here's the thing. Ask anybody who's been reading Marvel Comics for any measure of time. This is kind of a compliment from Dr. Doom, right? I mean, it's backhanded, but it's kind of it's as close as you're going to get to Dr. Doom being like, you know what, Peter, your daughter really saved our life. Don't be too hard on her. I mean, that's basically what he's saying, but he's saying it in like a Dr. Doom way. It's one of those Dr. Doom things, right? Just kind of the way that Dr. Doom addresses things. And so ultimately, you know, you have Jessica Jones who chips in and is like, look, I know it's going to sound crazy, Peter. I know you're not going to want to hear it, but at the end of the day, they really are better off with us. Right? I mean, we'll keep them protected. We'll give our lives to make sure they're safe, but like, they really are better off with us. Plus, your daughter's got powers, and that could probably come in handy somewhere along the line. And so ultimately, Deadpool's like, yeah! Family road trip to the heart of darkness. And so he gets like a Deadmobile. Right now, I don't know if Deadpool has ever had a Deadmobile. It's basically a Batmobile, but for Deadpool. Well, technically it's a Deadpool bus, but you understand the point, right? It's cool. Like, I absolutely love this idea of Deadpool getting like his own mode of transportation. I think it's amazing. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I don't know if this appears in other Deadpool comics, but if it doesn't, it needs to appear more often. I think it'd be hilarious if like in the new Deadpool movie, right, Deadpool 3, that like some kind of crazy thing pops off, you know, or like when he first appears in the MCU, and you just hear like this bus horn pull up, and Deadpool just like, he rolls up in a bus, right, like the Deadmobile, and it's like, what's going on, guys? Like, it's like, it takes like 2 minutes, right, for him to like shut everything down, turn it off, open the door, and then get out. It's just like this 2-minute ordeal of like Deadpool getting out of his vehicle. I feel like it'd be hilarious, right? It's like the most Deadpool thing ever. But at the end of the day, of course, they all end up basically racing off to Europe. Now, the thing about this, or at least to Paris anyway, the thing about this is that from Portugal to Paris takes a little more than just a bus trip, right? It takes a little more than like a few hours. And so ultimately they end up just kind of sitting aside and resting for a period of time. And basically you get this realization from Gabby that like someone's tracking them, right? There's a scent they're picking up on that's not supposed to be there. And as it's described, it smells like rotted meat, right? Like it's just, it's bitter, it's rotten, it's nasty. And it's like, we don't know exactly what this is, but whatever it is hunting for us. And so at that point, like literally they're in Europe, right? Like the heart of the vampire empire. And so at that point, Blade's like, let's go hunting. And so as they go scoping around, seemingly the attacker comes from out of nowhere, only for us to find out it's basically the Apocalypse symbiote. Now, the Apocalypse symbiote's mind-blowing. The nature of Gabby is that the nanites in her body prevent her from feeling pain, which is true. And as a result of that, she's never really felt pain before in her life. But being impaled like this, she feels the full sensation of what it means to hurt. She's feeling pain for the very first time. And of course, screams out exactly the way that you would expect. At that point, Dr. Doom fires up, right? It's like this amazing shot, which to be honest, man, I kind of want this with no speech bubbles so I can frame it, because I feel like it would just be amazing. But he's literally like, stay together, stay with the fire, right? Because seemingly like Dr. Doom has kind of picked up on what's going on to a degree. Because one of the things that Peter and them say is like, I mean, we don't pick up anything. Like, we don't detect anything, which right off the bat, Dr. Doom's just kind of like, okay, so that means symbiotes, right? That means whatever's hunting us, it can be detected by Lord Kid, which means it's there. And if it was a vampire, Peter Parker would detect it. If it was anything other than something that was symbiote-based, Peter Parker would protect it. Hence the logic, stay with the fire, because as we know, symbiotes are weak to fire. Now, at that point, we end up finding out that what's gone on here is the Venom symbiote and the Carnage symbiote symbiote have actually merged together onto a singular host. Now, of course, the first thing, and this is really just an assassination mission, is what this really is. The first thing to do here is take out Moon Girl, right? Like eliminate her, because she's basically the smartest person in the group. Of course, Devil Dinosaur jumps in the way. Don't worry, guys, Devil Dinosaur doesn't die. Right? Devil Dinosaur is like a dog for us, right? Like, we don't care what happens to the people as long as nothing happens to the dog. We are incensed. It's just one of those crazy things. But of course, Devil Dinosaur survives, right? Devil Dinosaur makes it, basically chews up the symbiote, spits him out. Symbiote, of course, doesn't die. But that leads to Peter Parker stepping in. Now, of course, Deadpool makes this hilarious remark about how Peter Parker's, how his web shooters have changed now, because basically they go by thwap instead of thwip, which of course is based on the new technology he uses, basically a furnace-based system to power his web shooters than anything else. But again, like, they're literally surrounded by basically a Carnage and Venom symbiote merger onto a single host. Here's the thing, guys, Venom is enough for pretty much any one of these guys, and that's on a bad day, right? You throw in Venom on a good day, no, he'd overpower virtually everybody here. Then you add Carnage into the mix, basically there'd be no real chance anybody here could defeat this guy. But that's when you get Pepper Potts stepping in with the Iron Man suit. Now, one of the things to remember, because of the fact that all electricity across the world has been taken down, Stark Tech as it traditionally exists is basically out the window. This new Iron Man suit that's being used by Pepper Potts, which is really just kind of a modified Hulkbuster suit, that is actually a walking furnace, right? It's really what it is. Like, it's literally like the Iron Furnace. We could call it that. What do you guys think we should call it? You know what? You guys name it. What do you think that we should call this Iron Man suit, right? Like, would you call it like the Iron Furnace? I don't know. What do you guys think that we should call this thing? But ultimately, because of the fact that it's literally powered by fire, that Pepper steps in and just literally blasts the symbiote off of its host. And then, of course, that leads to Storm jumping in and then using the power of thunder and lightning to basically destroy the symbiotes in their entirety. So now the Venom and the Carnage symbiotes are totally annihilated, which begs the question, who's the host of the Venom symbiote, right? Who's the host? Like, what person has been ensnared by both of these symbiotes and forced to operate as a host? The answer to that question is that it's Miles Morales. I bet you thought I was going to leave you on a cliffhanger, didn't you? Like, the answer to that question, we'll find out in the next video. No, the answer is that it's Miles Morales. Right now, we don't know how that happened, and we'll actually find out later. But what Miles says is, because remember, whenever a person is ensnared by the Purple Man, and we're assuming that Miles was, that whenever that happens, even if that wasn't the case, Miles was still in there, albeit with the Venom and the Carnage symbiote, you're really kind of being the ones running the show, that he remembers everything that happened. And he's like, I know exactly how Apocalypse is going to end the world. And what this does is it's going to take this timetable that the superheroes have, and it's going to speed it up like that. They're gonna have virtually no time at all. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.